grownfolksmusic.com.
A lot of times when we think about the Minneapolis sound, we think of Prince, but Sounds of Blackness is very much a part of that, especially because the group originated in that area. Tell us about how Sounds of Blackness became the group we know it to be today.
Certainly, and I'll try to tie in the Minneapolis sound aspect of it in answering your question as well. Sounds of Blackness, as of January, celebrated our 51st anniversary. We began at my alma mater, Macalester College, right across the river from Minneapolis in St. Paul. And actually, in 1969, the group Macalester College Black Voices was founded by Mr. Russell Knight, the native of Beaumont, Texas. He was a student at Macalester. I came to Macalester in 71, and Russell asked me on as director as he was getting ready to graduate. And the vision that the good Lord gave me was to mold them in the tradition of Duke Ellington. And that surprises a lot of people when I say that. But too many people don't know. Of course, we hear Duke's name and we think of jazz, and we certainly should. But too many people don't know that Duke wrote, recorded, and performed spirituals, blues, work songs, African music, every sound of Blackness, the music of the culture. And so that's the meaning and origin of the name and why we changed it from Macalester College Black Voices to Sounds of Blackness. And we grew up with Prince, with Jimmy Jam, Terry Lewis. And so the Minneapolis sound is really a family of Jam and Lewis and Prince and Morris Day and the Time and Cynthia Johnson, Funky Town, who also is original Sounds of Blackness member. A lot of people don't know that. Alexander O'Neill is original Sounds of Blackness member. A lot of people don't know that. So we worked together even as kids, in bands, rehearsing, the annual Black Northside Festival, the Miss Black Minnesota pageant. We were all a part of those things together. And so when the professional opportunities came and record labels and all that, we didn't forget about each other.
So that was what I was going to ask next. Can you talk about how the recording opportunity came about to be on Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis label Perspective, how that all came about? Because a lot of people think, even I thought, that Mint Condition was the first act signed to Perspective, but no, Sounds of Blackness is the first act signed
Yes,
to Perspective. Talk about how
that's
that
correct.
came to be.
And we're very honored by that and always will be to this day. But to answer your question in terms of how that came to be, I kind of touched on that in the answering your previous question, but I need to expand on that relative to this question. Specifically with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, both our families, our parents, in fact, that's how our family, the Hines family, got to Minneapolis. I'm a proud native of Yonkers, New York, so East Coast in the house. And Minneapolis used to be a jazz mecca. I mean, Duke Ellington, speaking of Duke, Count Basie, Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, et cetera, were here very frequently. And my mom, the late, great Doris Hines, was a great jazz singer in her own right. And she was booked here for 2 weeks and got held over for a year.
Wow.
Yeah, right. It was going on like that. So she fell in love with the Twin Cities and moved us here. And Jimmy Jam's parents, Cornbird Harris, the great blues singer and pianist, are part of that tradition. His mom, Mama Jam, as we used to call her, rest her soul, was a piano teacher, and so all of us were part of this very small Black but very vibrant Black community. Coming here from New York, was like a whole nother planet, especially back in the 60s. But the small Black population here was very active, especially musically. Prince's father, as people saw in the movie Purple Rain, was a jazz musician and composer. So it's important, and I don't mean to go on too long with the answer, but it's important to lay that backdrop so that a Prince, a Jimmy Jam, a Terry Lewis, a Gary Hines, a Sounds of Blackness didn't just appear. We emerged from something that was going on because of the richness of the Black music scene here in Minneapolis.
It was a great beginning for Perspective too, not only signing you as the first act, but Sounds of Blackness won a Grammy straight out the gate for the first album for Evolution of Gospel.
Yes.
Optimistic was an instant classic.
Oh, thank you.
Instant classic. And its reach has gone far and wide. I was surprised to hear you say in another interview that it was a late addition to the album.
Yes. In fact, if I can, first of all, let me commend you on great questions. If I can follow what's been happening here and touch on the previous question and lead into this one, in terms of how optimistic was the last song. In terms of Sounds of Blackness being the first artist signed, what you have to remember at the time was Jam and Lewis was then, as they probably still are now, the #1 producers on the planet. And they were working with like the biggest names at the time, Janet and Michael. I mean, George Michael. People may not know, at the time, George Michael was one of the biggest artists on the planet, Human League. And so I say that to say this, when they were laying the groundwork for what was going to be Perspective Records, and they were primarily working with A&M Records, a very major label at the time, and Polygram Distribution, which at the time was the #1 distributor in the world. And I'm making a point with all of this. And the point is this, clearly Polygram and A&M were counting on Jam and Lewis to lure Michael and Janet and George Michael and Human League, to A&M, to the Polygram family, especially since they were starting a label. Well, to their great surprise, not only did that not happen, but Jam and Lewis proudly announced to them, no, our first act is Sounds of Blackness. Sounds of who? and how many, right, and how many of them are there? And at the time there were like 30 of us kind of thing, and now we're still at 25. But how many, and wait a minute, they sing all these types of music. How are we going to market them? There were all these questions. So just to put that in perspective, but Jam and Lewis, God bless them, my dear brothers for decades, said something that is totally contrary to what the industry usually tells us. And when the first thing they said to me was Doc, and that's always been their nickname for me. Doc, don't change anything. We want to present you to the world just the way you are. And now that goes fast forwards into your most immediate question. We had just been, Jam and Lewis was very familiar for the aforestated reasons, of Sounds of Blackness repertoire and us working together all the time. So they knew all of our concert productions. We have a big Motown production called Soul of the 60s. We have a civil rights production called Music for Martin Luther King. We have our Christmas show the night before Christmas. They knew all of that. And so what they wanted was for us, the first album, to be one of our productions called The Evolution of Gospel. So that title came from that production. And to finally finish up the answer and to make sense out of what the center of your question is, we had recorded, probably 12 songs at least. And I was blessed to be a staff producer at the time, and they called me into their office. We were practically living at flight time anyway. I mean, literally. And I'll never forget. And they said, Doc, we know we've got an amazing record here, but we feel like we need one more that will just be a universal classic that will stand the test of time and that everybody can relate to, and that will stand the test of time. And the word optimistic keeps coming to us. So we were in that office the rest of that night. They had started working on a track, and yours truly collaborated with them on that. We called the group in that next night, and they were kind of exhausted. Like, thought we were done recording, kind of thing. Oh, we got one more for you. And I tell you, my sister, that session was just absolutely magic. And now it has stood the test of time. Our dear friends Common and Brandy and Robert Glasper have done remakes of it. There have been jazz musicians who have done remakes of it. The Optimistic Challenge has been online on TikTok. All of those kind of things have happened. And so we're just thankful that it has become a classic.
First, let me just tell you that you cannot tell us too many stories here. We like stories here.
Oh, okay, because I got them.
You especially cannot tell us too many stories about Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. They are revered around here. And we even have a playlist called Flight Time Extended, the pen and production of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. So it's on Spotify. Check it out when you can. And Mr. Harris was so generous in our earlier days to sit down and take a minute and interview with us. So they are loved and appreciated around here. You can't tell too many stories. So with that, I'm going to ask you, what's the best story? You mentioned the optimistic remakes and different versions and
Mhm.
the challenge, but what's the best story you've heard about that song?
Wow, I've got the perfect one for you, and it's sitting across the way, a few yards from me, on my dining room table. It's like, what? Okay, let me explain that. So this probably had to be maybe 9 or 10 years ago, and we were Sounds was our touring group was performing in London, um, which we've been blessed to do many times, and they're so supportive in terms of the international market. And we were in fact we were playing the encore. We saved Optimistic for the encore, um, and I'll never forget. The concert hall was jam packed. I mean, standing room only, and everybody was on their feet, and was playing Optimistic. And I'm at my keyboard, at the end, and I look out in the audience, and I see this woman, and she's waving her arm, and she's got something in her hand, and she's fighting her way through the crowd. I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe she just really wants an autograph or something like that. And long story short, we're doing Optimistic, and the crowd's going wild, all that kind of thing. And she makes her way up to the stage, past all the big burly security guards and all. I mean, it reminded me of that woman in the Bible, just wanted to touch them.
Mhm.
So I mean, she was bound and determined. But long story short, and the reason I tell you that it's sitting on my table right now, she handed me a note that I'll never forget. And that note said, when my mother died, Optimistic saved my life.
Mm.
So, the Grammys and all that are great. We'd be lying if we said we weren't honored or aren't honored by that, and treasure them. And all the awards are amazing blessings. But nothing, when somebody comes up to you and tells you that your music, or some message in your music helped to change or save their life, like the beer commercial says, it doesn't get any better than that.
You mentioned earlier, and I didn't want to let it pass us. You
Mhm.
mentioned that Alexander O'Neill is alumni of Sounds of Blackness. I was very surprised to learn that.
Mhm.
How did Alexander O'Neill become a part of the group for a short time? There's two alums I want to talk about, but the first is Alexander O'Neill because I was so shocked to hear that. I don't know why
Yeah.
I was shocked because he was associated with the time and things like that.
Right, right. Well, I can tell you, and trust me, he'll be the first to tell you. But when Alex, or Xander, as we frequently call him, moved to Minneapolis from Natchez, Mississippi, um, he came to audition for Sounds of Blackness. Okay, and I'll never forget. I've only done this probably over all the years, probably on a handful of occasions. That where I stopped the audition, like before it was over. It's like, okay, welcome aboard, kind of thing. I mean, obviously, this was just an extraordinary talent, and he was with us about a year before he went to what was called the Flight Time, band at the time before they became the Time. And like I say, he'd be the first to tell you that. And we would go and perform places, and people would say, "Man, who is that new guy you guys got?" And of course, before not too long, the whole world knew it. And I know you didn't ask about her, but the same thing happened with Cynthia Johnson. Now, people don't know that name as well, but if you say Funky Town, everybody knows
Mhm.
Funky Town. That's she's a Sounds alum as well, and of course, along with the great Ann Nesby as well.
So the next alum that I'd like to talk about, and I'm kind of embarrassed that I didn't know that this person was part of Sounds of Blackness, is Big Jim Wright.
Big Jim.
And for the grown folks who don't know, Big Jim Wright is a very, very important part of Flight Time's production. He was a writer, a musician, a producer, an arranger, and he had a
Yeah,
big hand in a lot of the success that Flight Time had for the
yeah,
artists that Flight Time produced and wrote for. And more recently, before his death, he was Mariah Carey's music director.
right.
Please tell us your best story about Big Jim, right?
Oh my goodness. And as your followers or viewers can probably tell by both of our laughter, I mean, his Big Jim's personality and sense of humor were as big as his gigantic music talent. So that's why we're reacting that way. For those that say, why are they chuckling about it? And just the thought of him, is just overwhelming. It's still a little unreal that he's gone, but there's a bunch of Big Jim memories. um, I'd say, since I mentioned his humor, well, there's a bunch right there too, but I'll never forget maybe this story. So we're and speaking of optimistic too, so you'll see the tie-in in a minute. So it's early 90s. Optimistic is, banging everywhere, thank God, and all that kind of thing. And Washington, D.C., and the sister who's the mayor at the time, Mayor Sister Sharon Pratt Kelly, designates Optimistic as the official city a song of the District of Columbia, kind of thing. So, well, we have to fly in for that. So Sounds and Jam and Lewis, come in, and of course Big Jim obviously was part of our band, on keyboards with me and Billy Steele, and then part of our touring group. So we go. Oh my God, where were we? We were at the city hall to the mayor's, and we had this huge police escort. And while we were waiting backstage, because we were going to be escorted with the mayor, and all these, just a million police officers. And there's this one sister, there that's almost as beautiful as you. Okay. And we're waiting back there, and what Big Jim breaks out just out of nowhere with this totally extemporaneous song that he made up on the top of his head. Police woman, arrest me with your love. And all of a sudden he's singing this loud, and the halls are reverberating kind of thing. And people are turning and looking, and everybody. I mean, the sister was just exceptionally attractive, uniform and all kind of things. So everybody knew who he was talking about. And it probably doesn't sound funny, but if you can imagine that security, real serious situation, and then Big Jim breaks up all of that, singing. And then he got down on one knee, oh my God, and then everybody's cracking up, kind of. So, policewoman, arrest me with your love. And we wish we had still had him here to make a single for that, because it probably would have gone viral.
Thank you for that. Thank you for blessing us with that story.
Yeah.
So if Alexander O'Neal tried out for Sounds of Blackness, does that mean that at some point you no longer had to be one of the students at the college to be part of the group? How do members come and go now? How does one become part of Sounds of Blackness now?
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'll make those delineations for you. So again, our roots are at Macalester College here, specifically in St. Paul, of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. We incorporated in 1975 because Stokely's dad is a the artist Stokely. His dad, Professor Mahmoud El Kadi, is a world-renowned professor of African and African-American history, and he was a professor at Macalester at the time. He has been a mentor and guide and counselor of Sounds of Blackness, and still is, like, for years. And he told us to be more than just a band, but to be a cultural institution, to be a musical speaking voice for Black America. So, with our song now, like Time for Reparations and Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired, a lot of people thought that protest movement music was new for us, but that's actually part of our roots, kind of thing. Anyway, I mentioned that just tie all that together. But we, as Sounds of Blackness, have always had annual auditions, but then as the group, notoriety started to spread, it started to get to be too big of a cattle call, kind of thing. And then plus, we've always been blessed with really loyal and dedicated membership, so there were fewer and fewer openings unless somebody got a job out of town and moved away, or got married or whatever, like moved out of town, kind of thing. So we physically moved out of the college in like the mid 70s, and started rehearsing more directly in the community. Sabathani Community Center, which, by the way, is just like 5 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. I mean, in the heart of the Southside Black community here. So when I say, you know, we're in the hood, that we're proud of that kind of thing. We still are. So from that point to now, what we do is almost more on a referral basis, because still, even I'm the only original member there, and especially the ladies in the group would want me to emphasize that. Tell them that we're not that old. You're the only one that's this old. And so, in fact, many of our current members are actually offspring of original members, like Jamesia Bennett, who's one of our featured vocalists, is Ann Nesby's daughter, and it goes Cynthia Johnson's daughter, Nika, is one of our great sopranos. So now to audition and to finish the answer to the question, it's usually more on a referral basis, or someone will approach us, or every now and then we'll open up, and just because they're always out there. So if somebody moves away, you know, gets married, you know, get out of town, and we have an opening kind of thing, and there's not a waiting list, then we'll go ahead and say we're going to audition, you know, on a in 2 weeks kind of thing. Here's a location kind of thing. Contact us. But we fortunately don't have the need anymore to do annual auditions.
Speaking of the 2 singles that you mentioned, and the music always being a voice about Black culture and events that impact Black people, talk about Time for Reparations and Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired. These are the more recent singles from Sounds of Blackness.
They
Talk
are.
about that and why. I mean, it seems obvious why you would choose to pin that, but why you chose to go in that direction for the singles?
Well, to take a song out of Brother Stokely, his current record, Sankofa, looking back to move forward, you know, that African themed concept. And I say that to say this: Time for Reparations. Of course, the movement for reparations goes back to the 1860s. It's really interesting. It's a testament to how little of our history is taught in school. That how many people think that the call for reparations is new. It's like, no, can you say like, well over a century? So every phase of our movement for liberation has had an anthem accompanying it. So you know that the civil rights movement had We Shall Overcome, and even the Black Power movement had Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, and To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. Sounds of Blackness, when the Black Lives Matter movement 5 or 6 years ago really was spreading, we contacted the national office, Sister Alicia Garza, and one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, and said, we've got an anthem for you. We sent that to them because we believe in the words of Paul Robeson, who once said that all true artists have a responsibility to their people. So we never just want to talk the walk. We always, at Sounds of Blackness, want to walk the talk. So that's why we did Black Lives Matter. And then when Brother George Floyd was lynched, I know him because I got calls from PD's program directors, for those that don't know the lingo of your listeners, around the country saying, Gary, we need another optimistic. We need another optimistic. And I told them, I said, you know what? That's not the direction that the good Lord's leading me. And I understand what you're saying. And I understand that their frame of reference for Sounds of Blackness is the uplifting, optimistic, and hold on, change is coming, and I believe. But you know what? What the Lord kept sending my queen sister was the words of Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, because George Floyd's lynching, as abominable as it was in its own right, in the broader perspective, represented something that has happened to our people, men and women, adults and children, in one form or another for 400 years. And so it needed an anthem. Sick of the words of Fannie Lou Hamer. A lot of people use that term. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, but they don't know who originated it. The great Fannie Lou Hamer of Mississippi Democratic Freedom Labor Party spoke those words in 1964. And no sooner than George was killed, just the Lord sent those words into my mind, sick and tired, sick and tired, sick and tired. And I was up a couple of nights writing it, but that's why to be a part of that. And Time for Reparations last year, when it was announced that the Congressional Black Caucus had introduced HR 40 as a bill, for reparations, and that Evanston, Illinois, the city of Evanston was actually initiating a program for reparations. And when the theme for Juneteenth across the country last year was reparations, it's like, okay, no, we can't call ourselves Sounds of Blackness and not lend music to that. And it was so in your face for a lot of radio that we didn't get a lot of airplay. I had a lot of program directors apologizing, saying, Gary, this is a great track. It's slamming, man, and the message is right on. But we're afraid of offending sponsors, and it's a little too in your face. People expected another optimistic from you guys, and we understood that. But we're thankful to the NAACP, who just a couple of weeks ago nominated us, Time for Reparations, for an NAACP Image Award.
Thank you for touching on that, because that's something that I thought about, but I hadn't put the words together, that radio and maybe even some fans really expected a certain sound from Sounds of Blackness, a certain type of music. So in some ways, these two singles seem to come from nowhere, but they don't. And it's funny how you've been placed in that box, if you will, that the radio and certain people are saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like what we're used to from you.
Right.
I guess the blessing, and do you find the blessing of now having streaming and the internet and other channels to release your music helps you to be free artistically, not just for music that speaks on social justice, but whatever theme you might want to touch on in your music, whatever sound you might want to change it up to? Do you find now that you have more freedom in creativity in Sounds of Blackness music, because you don't have to really please a record company or please radio anymore? You have different ways of releasing and distributing your music.
The answer is a resounding absolutely yes. And bless and rest his soul, Prince was such a big proponent of that before it even became in vogue. And I know he would be ecstatic about that. Sounds of Blackness has been independent, our own just Sounds of Blackness label for 20 plus years now. And so the internet has been just monumentally instrumental in us being able to do that, with a reasonable measure of success and notoriety kind of thing, to get it out, because it's instantaneously international when you release it, on the net kind of thing. And we to get fan club mail from Germany and from South America and from of course the motherland, Africa, and all that about and we're not even on a major label. And then again, like I said, to get this nomination. So to answer your question, yes, the internet has just been invaluable in enabling artists to release independently.
My last question for you, Mr. Hines, and you've been so generous with your conversation. Thank you so much. My last question for you is, what is your definition of grown folks music?
My definition of grown folks music is that music, we say what comes from the heart reaches the heart. And for me, grown folks music has its roots in the motherland and has a manifestation. Blues, for example, work songs, field hollers, and what we know as classic blues have their roots melodically in the 5-tone West African pentatonic scale. Now, not to get real deep and all of that kind of thing, there's a reason I'm calling that soul music. And the polyrhythms and syncopations, the funk, the syncopation of African music and drumming is at the heart of that, whether it's blues, jazz, gospel, R&B, neoclassic, some hip hop, and so for me, it's grown folks music. If it reaches the heart, if it has those textures and sensibilities, because grown folks gravitate towards music that has substance and roots to it, and that they can relate to, whether it's past, present, and hopefully future as well.
Before we go, shout it out. And what that means is just tell us where we can see and consume all things Sounds of Blackness, the website, any social media accounts, what are those handles, where we can get the two new singles, all things Sounds of Blackness.
Thank you, and thank you in advance again for just amazing questions and a phenomenal. In the words of the late great Maya Angelou, you're a phenomenal woman. So thank you. But to answer your question, the easiest way is first to know that at all the social sites, all of our handles are basically our name. So starting with our website, soundsofblackness.org. Now, if you type .com, it's going to go to .org, so that's okay. So just remember Sounds of Blackness, but our website is soundsofblackness.org. Not only can you purchase our music there, our singles, and our new album actually called The Justice Project, which is a compilation of all of our social conscious music kind of thing. So The Justice Project is our album there, but also our merchandise from Sick and Tired. People have been asking, wow, those t-shirts you guys wore in the video, and please go to YouTube and check out the videos. Black Lives Matter, Royalty, Sick and Tired, and Now Time for Reparations. People always ask about the t-shirts, the hoodies, the hats kind of thing. All of those are available at soundsofblackness.org. And when you purchase them, please know that you're not only supporting Sounds of Blackness, but we donate a portion of the proceeds to the George Floyd Scholarship Foundation. So like I say, we don't just talk the walk, we believe in walking the talk. And in terms of the other social media, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, it's just our name, Sounds of Blackness, and we'll pop up and we will get back to you. When you hear from us, it will not be some intern or some machine. It will be definitely of us, and very possibly myself as well.
Mr. Hines, Mr. Gary Hines, thank you so much for taking time out for Grown Folks Music this evening.
On behalf of Sounds of Blackness, thank you so much for having us. Please don't be a stranger. We would love to come back anytime.
Thank you so much. Have a blessed day.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
GrownFolksMusic.com